Hi, welcome everybody. This is Legislative Review on April Fool's Day, 2021, and we have a quorum. I guess we'll start with the approval of the agenda. Is everybody good with how we've got this laid out for today? Yeah, okay. And then I'm going to lean on you guys for approval of the minutes since I missed that meeting. So I'll look for a motion and a second, and I'll call a vote.
Motion to approve the minutes.
From March 4th. I got a second?
I have a second, but I have one correction. They're doing that right. I believe on page 2. I don't want to, and maybe I'm wrong, but on page 2, the second to last paragraph, Sarah, that says Andrew Saunders, and it said previously, second line, described a desire to preserve green space. I thought he might have meant roof space there because we were talking about roofs. And I don't really know what document actually Jesse was referring to on page 6, but I'm not sure if it was section E or not. That's in page 6 in the middle of the paragraph. But I don't know. Jesse can correct that if that's a problem. Because I couldn't find it. But Jesse, is that something you want to correct?
Are you talking about many of the feelings in the memo, the findings in the memo paragraph?
The page 6, it says Commissioner Houle explained that over half. It's the second to last page. And about like a third of the way down, it says proposed section E. Maybe.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, that's section E. That's the neighborhood traffic management plan, right? That's the part that's about the tenants. Yeah, section. Yeah, I think that's accurate. Yeah, it's section 3E.
3E?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's the one you mean.
It is. Yeah, that's the one that's excluding commercial property where there's apartments.
Okay. Well, it's not in the one that I'm looking at, but that's okay. You know. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I'll motion to approve with my correction of green to roof.
It sounds like that's more in line with the discussion, and I wasn't even there. Okay, we'll take a vote for accepting the minutes with that rooftop correction. Do I hear those who approve?
Yay.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that's 3. Anybody opposed? I don't think so. So that's unanimous. The minutes go down with that correction. And so we're going to start off with the traffic calming neighborhood traffic management. So Blaine, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Madam Chair. And y'all been, each of these meetings have been full with discussion, and you've been moving things out. It's been a couple of months since we've had this discussion. So if I might suggest that we allow Steve perhaps to compare and contrast the policy that we currently have before us with the existing policy that Sarah shared. Maybe that'll kind of bring us back up to where we were, and hopefully we're close to getting some direction and moving forward. So if that's appropriate, Madam Chair, I'll ask Steve to begin.
I think that sounds good. Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Happy Fool's Day to everybody. I've done a lot of reading because I wanted to compare what we have currently that we've been working on and what we're proposing. Besides what we had before being very bureaucratic, it was very difficult to read. And the one I read was actually changed from the original. Originally, you had to have 750 cars a day and a speed over 35 miles an hour. The director, Clarke, changed it to 32.5 into, I believe, 500 cars a day, which was okay. It was a good start. But it was still a very bureaucratic process, hard to follow, and tied the hands of the traffic engineer when he found safety problems.
And Steve, if I might, that reduction, if I remember correctly, was actually through the work of the committee as well. And
okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I had forgotten about that. When I retired for 2 years, my memory of some things kind of went away. But coming back, it's coming back slowly. But I did compare the two, and the purpose. I sat down with our traffic engineer and Stephen Bailey when we did this, and I tried to reform this policy into something that was more practical, logical, and brought the criteria down to something that made sense, and give the traffic engineer the ability to see it when he finds a problem or an issue to address it safely. Okay, and this is a very, very simple process compared to what we had before, and it opens the arms for the traffic engineer to use common sense and good traffic engineering principles and look at real problems on the roadway, safety problems. The whole purpose of traffic calming is for safety, giving the neighborhood back to the neighbors. That is the purpose of traffic calming. What we're proposing does that. We've dropped it down to 30 miles an hour. Roadways are posted at 25, so it's 5 over what the postings are. And the speed is 300, or the volume is 300, which is way down. A lot of our roadways did not even come close to 300 before. But this opens the door because now the traffic engineer goes in, he does a field review, and notices that it didn't really meet one of these criteria, but he sees an issue of a potential safety problem. He can bring in the roadway safety audit team, do a complete audit of that roadway, identify safety issues that may be on speeding as well. Could be some sight distance issues that he might be able to correct. The team is very, very positive team because they look at everything. And they don't look at it from a traffic engineer's point of view. Because we have planners, we have people from streets, we have people from planning, we have people from everywhere come into this who don't do this for a living, but they drive a car and they live in neighborhoods. So that was the whole purpose of bringing the roadway safety audit team. The product we can get from this is much better. If we go much farther than this, we're going to be put traffic calming everywhere, and then it loses its function. It becomes, if you don't have a problem, we're putting because we want them, then we're getting out of the whole purpose of this. We're trying to identify safety concerns. I will tell you, this is going to open the door to a lot of projects that we have looked at in the past that we haven't been able to do because of our criteria. I've done this for, it seemed like 100 years, but the 11 years that I was a traffic engineer, I've done a lot of these. And I walked around with my hands tied. So I know what Tim Griffith is going through. When your hands are tied, you see a problem and you can't fix it. This opens the door to allow our traffic engineer, who's worked very, very hard at trying to make these work, make them work. A classic example we've been working on is Boulevard. And we've come up with several solutions. Tim has worked day and night trying to come up with solutions. Part of the issue is the people who live there don't really know what they want. We've gone out and met with them. So we've been working on it for several months. But now we're to a point where we've got a concept that'll work. Because they live there, instead of us telling them what to do, we can tell them what we can do to help them, but give them some options. So it was a very, very positive, workable process. Tim has worked day and night on this, trying to make it work. He's put down things on the roadway. We even had our engineering administrator helping us with some design issues to see if we could do some things. Tim is really, really on top of this. He wants to be. He's excited about this new process because this now unleashes his arms to be able to do the positive things. And I would like to talk about one thing about renters. I am concerned about it. I've had renters at meetings, and then I don't mind that because they have ideas. They have a lot. They live there. They see this. Their ideas are real positive, oftentimes. But it's still the property owner who owns that property that this could affect them. So that's my biggest concern. But if we move with this, you will see a major influx of projects come through. I hope not to overwhelm Tim or overwhelm the commission, but we have several that are sitting there waiting. In fact, we get calls and we say, if you'll just wait, we're going through a new process. Let us study it that way. We'll do it one time and be on top of it. And I do want to talk one more thing about there's another document that you saw was the process. That is a dynamic process. This has nothing to do with these other than Someone calls me and they want to do this. I send them a copy of this so they know what to expect next. What do I need to do next? What's going to happen next? It's basically so they don't answer some of the questions before they ask them. Of course, I say it's dynamic because as we do this process, we may find something that's simplified or maybe more information needed, so I can just change that and help them, or Tim can change that and help them. That's just something that we've been doing. I started that probably in 2010 because I saw that we were not communicating very well with the people asking the questions, and they needed to have information. So that's what that document's for. I just share it with people who call us. And of course, now the commissioner has all of it too to see what we're doing. I stand for any questions.
I just want to clarify something before we start the questions, because the document titled Existing NTMP Program, to me, looks more like the process. I guess that's the actual policy. And then the one that's titled NTMP Process is sort of the abbreviated version that we're trying to upgrade, right?
And I tried to take the bureaucracy out of it and simplify it in layman terms so anybody can understand it and not have to figure out what the government's talking about. And I know that sounds terrible, but sometimes we do that and we don't mean to, but I try to simplify things.
We understand. You guys are engineers. We understand. We're trying to and then am I correct in remembering that the formula 300 threshold we can change? 85 percentile is a set standard. That percentile can't change. And then the miles per hour is also something that we've improved. Is that right?
Yes, we've reduced it from 500 down to 300 and the speed from 32.5 down to 30. But I think the caveat here is the fact that that's the beginning point.
Yeah.
But if a traffic engineer identifies a safety problem, it allows him the ability to bring the mobility safety audit team in, which opens a big can of worms, but they're positive worms. We're going to be able to look at things that we've not looked at before, that no one's ever considered before. This is a real, true neighborhood management program for traffic calming, much better than we've ever had. And I think you'll see a better product.
Okay, let's start with committee questions. I didn't see whose hand was up first. Go ahead, you guys pick. Carol. And then Jesse.
Steve, I'm just clarifying again the documents here because the process document that are you saying you're already using this? Like if people call?
We don't use that particular one. We have another one that we have been using for the old process. Okay. I updated that to fit the new process to see what we would hand out to the new people.
Okay, that was what was confusing me a little bit there. So this is taking what's in the process that we've been looking at already, and it kind of some of it is word for word, some of it is there's something like the contact information is there and it has like the funding, it's thinking about what a person would need. So that helps me. This one is not in practice yet. It's based on this other one that we've been working on. Okay. Got it.
And Commissioner Myers, just to clarify, this might be helpful. If you look at the document titled Existing NTMP Program, there is an appendix or Exhibit A down at the bottom, which is, I think it's a 10-step process, which is what this is improving on. Right.
Okay. Yeah. With all those boxes, the flow chart. Yeah.
Right.
And did that on that existing one at the end? There's a chart with neighborhood cost sharing, and I was a little confused just looking at that quickly. I thought you guys said like last time that all the projects like neighborhoods had not been paying for this.
And that's correct. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
No, we're going to say the exact same thing. That's correct. We built the process because we realized there may be a time when funding wouldn't be available to cover it at 100%, but it hasn't been used like that.
And that other chart talks about the cut through. We're still going to look at cut through just so that that's something that roadway safety audit team needs to know about, but that's not one of the criteria.
While we're speaking about previous ones, so I can get this in my head, I've been driving around Green Acres some, and there's a lot of speed bumps in there. I don't know how long they've been there, but are there instances existing on the ground now where there may be more speed bumps than we would put in now because a neighborhood wanted them? I don't know what the influence of the neighborhood or whatever had on them, but I just into the comparison between the places where there are no speed bumps and where there seem to be a lot of speed bumps in some area.
Now, and I will tell you that those were put in before I got here, so I really can't tell you about that, but I will tell you the standard that was used is the same standard we're using today.
Okay.
That was probably done holistically because there's so many, and maybe street by street, but they're typically spaced about 300 feet apart.
Okay.
Because anything closer than that is it just doesn't work. And 300 is adequate spacing, so they probably are about 300 feet apart, and it may have been several projects, and we still do that.
Okay. I'll pass it on.
All right. Stephen, did you get to interject what you wanted with that discussion? Okay. All right. Commissioner Hewell. And then we'll go to Parker.
All right. Yeah, I mean, as I recall where we left it in the last meeting, we were all, I think, pretty happy with this, except there was some discussion around the tenants part. And I believe I was supposed to actually send some edits with y'all in advance of this meeting, which I failed to do. And I can make I can give reasons for why, but those are not excuses. So I am sorry that I did not do that in advance of the meeting. But there's basically 4 sections that I would like to see edited, and then I would be totally happy with this. And I do want to underscore again that, like, I understand what generated this policy was a whole host of things and a real need to have a much better policy that was much more responsive and flexible. And I think that this is fantastic. So it's really, for me, just about the tenants portion. So the first section that I would like us to consider is...
Can you tell us exactly the document that you're reading from?
I'm reading NTMP 2921 changes, which, as I understand it, that's the most recent version, right? That's the...
Is that the one that's also, is that the same staff as NTPMP process? With
no,
212
it's the more extensive, elaborative one that we worked from in the last meeting.
Yes, the one that says update.
Yeah. Yeah, so at top it says policy number TE004, update in parentheses.
Okay, just go ahead. I'll dig it up.
So the first section is 3E, and so where it says the neighborhood traffic management program does not include commercial property, which typically includes apartments. I hate to sound like I'm just saying the same thing again as last meeting, and I'm happy to talk this out a bit, but I guess I would like to remove that section in that, or modify it in some way. And the example neighborhood in my district that comes to mind is Westchester, which is entirely rentals, is full of people who are walking all the time, and does have issues of cut through traffic and speeding. And so I would hate for that neighborhood or others like it to not be eligible. And that's why I would like to do that. So if we want to take these maybe one at a time, maybe we could start there. I saw that Steve had a comment on that. I know that's kind of at odds with what you were saying in your opening remarks. So
Go ahead.
And if I may, we typically have never done this because those apartment buildings are owned either by a corporation or someone. Now, let me bring it down to a roadway, a neighborhood, maybe has an apartment building on this roadway, but there's nothing but single family residence. And let's say there's 30 people in that apartment building. If we allow 30 votes versus 1 vote per resident, I don't know that we can. This doesn't seem like that's fair, first of all. And second of all, and I would ask Sherry if that would make sense legally.
So without worrying about the votes in the meeting part, I guess what I'm just trying to get at is wanting to make sure that there is a way for us to still do these studies and pursue traffic calming in neighborhoods like that. And then maybe we can tackle, because the other sections about who's counted for voting, I think we can get to later. But why I'm asking to remove this is just so that that kind of a neighborhood can still be pursued. Does that make sense? Even if we want to treat the decision-making process differently.
But I put in there that if the residents, the renters, have the permission from the homeowner to make a vote, that'd be fine. But I don't think that a apartment building with X number of people should have X number of votes. But should bring to our attention a problem, I think that's definitely what we should do. That's very positive. Because if there's an issue, we can certainly look at it. And it may be such a sense that we as the government contact the building owners and say we have these issues ourselves, and not put it in the lap of the renters, but we've identified a problem. Let's talk to the people who own the buildings and say, we've identified these safety problems. This is a potential solution, and get their input. Would that satisfy that?
I think so. Maybe we're talking past each other a little bit. The reason why I'm concerned about this section is because where it's positioned in the document makes it seem to me like neighborhoods like that aren't, like, this policy does not apply to neighborhoods like that at all. So it's not just about the method for how we communicate with residents or who weighs in on the decision making, but because this is in section 3E, the background, it just kind of says sweepingly, the neighborhood traffic management program does not include commercial property, which typically includes apartments. When I read that, that seems to me like a neighborhood like that is not able to pursue this at all, whether it's the owners of the apartment buildings or the residents on their behalf.
Let me see if I can clarify it. Sarah, thank you for getting that in front of me to help me see it's highlighted in yellow, I guess, capturing that was what was discussed last time. So in my commercial property, to me, seems more like industry, business, no dwelling. And Commissioner Huell, I'm hearing you say that you want to make sure wherever people are living, a commissioner or somebody can put that work request in to have traffic calming addressed, right? Because it's residential, right?
Correct.
Is that what I'm hearing? So how can we, staff, how can we tease out E to make it so that we're describing a neighborhood that would include apartments, but we're not including commercial where no one's living? How do we do that?
Suggestion, let's remove the apartments out of that line, and let's approach it. If we get approached by renters who have a concern, let's follow the approach that I just said. This gives the traffic, and it goes back to what the traffic engineer can do. He can work outside of this using safety and his safety team. If it's an issue and the renters bring it up, then let him contact the property owners. Sherry had a comment to that, I'm sure.
Well, and also the tenants could also be contacting their commissioner, because that's the other part we put in that wasn't in there before, right, Commissioner Huell?
Correct.
So that's giving the back and forth I think that we're wanting. And Sherry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, you're fine. And I may be misremembering this. So certainly Steve or Blaine, please correct me. And this is not so much a legal issue, but just as an unintended consequences issue. But I thought someone had explained to me that the reason that was in there was because of concern that these big developers would come in and then not properly build the kind of traffic calming devices that they need to be installing on their properties and try to get Athens-Clarke County to pay for that in the development. So I don't know if that's true or not. I just something that I believe I had heard.
But the roadway would have to be an Athens-Clarke County maintained roadway. What
Right.
they have internally, they would have to address. But I think the process that I described would probably solve that issue that the commissioner has about the renters. And I think it's appropriate, because we can very simply go to the tax roll and contact the owners and explain the issues and the safety concerns that we have. And that involves them, because they're going to continue renting their property. And if they have safety problems, that might be detrimental to their business. And so I think this is a positive approach. And they certainly can bring it to Tim's attention. We can study it, identify the problems, contact the property owners, say this are the issues. Do you agree with the concept? And then go that way. Does that make sense?
And to be clear, we do have it already in the policy that we're talking about public roadways. So remember where Willow Street is that cuts through where the mark is, that's private. And those things that area is not what we can address it and for them, but it doesn't come from the general fund or what T-SPLOST or whatever funding source we have. Is that correct? And that's already baked in there?
Correct.
Okay. Go ahead.
So am I understanding that basically we're just striking that latter clause from 3E? So where it says which typically includes apartments, we'll just remove that. And I think we're all on the same page.
I would like to leave commercial property, so because that's critical.
That totally makes sense to me. Yeah. And then is it okay if I just go through the other three little, yeah. So section 4CI1. Renters may obtain authority from the homeowner to participate in the neighborhood meeting. I wanted to just add the phrase on the homeowner's behalf. And so that's basically to clarify that we want to welcome renters in the meeting, whether they're there on their own accord or on behalf of the property owner. And then if they're there on behalf of the property owner, they have that in writing to be able to weigh in as a vote in their stead. But there's still the opportunity for renters to just be there as part of the discussion. So does that sound good to?
Yes, sir. And we encourage that because they may see something we may not see. But if they have the homeowner's approval to vote on this and that's even better. So, yes, sir.
And then I think the section y'all are referring to where people can reach out to the commissioner is 5BI. Right? Where it says a district commissioner may also submit a work request to the traffic engineer. I guess I'm curious y'all's thoughts on whether, because this is a policy that's, somewhat public facing, whether it's worthwhile to add in there, like any resident can contact their commissioner. I mean, that's sort of obvious, I think, right? But like,
and that's the way it's happened in the past, Commissioner, for many years.
Okay.
Yeah. We never stymied.
So basically, this is saying like a neighborhood owner-occupied homeowner can contact y'all directly, or anyone can contact their commissioner. And then,
and I just wanted to say that was one of the improvements we made when this did initially get to the committee. So that's why it's not highlighted as an update to it. And Commissioner Hu, I wanted to go back on the definitions in 4. Is that, we don't need to make any updates to that? You were just clarifying that it does include what you wanted.
No, there is one update. It's just adding the phrase on the homeowner's behalf.
Okay.
After neighborhood meeting. So
I wanted to make sure
may obtain written authority from the homeowner to participate in the neighborhood meeting on the homeowner's behalf and to provide a response pursuant to the letter.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. And now we're down to the highlighted under program initiation.
Before we leave that, Madam Chair, real quick,
yes.
Just as a matter of course and consistency, where it says may submit a work request to the traffic engineer, could we say may submit a work request through the manager to the traffic engineer?
Well, to be technically clear, our work orders are all supposed to go through the clerk.
Well, and that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about too. I mean, you could go either way. But
what if we say through the appropriate channels? Since we're still working out that process, would that work for you, Manager Williams?
Thank you.
Yeah. So instead of traffic engineer, it'll be through the appropriate channels. Because Blaine, I know some people come through you, some people it's through Gene, but that leaves it appropriate, right? And not in the right chain of command. Okay, is everybody okay with that?
Yeah, but I have another point on that, just a clarification on the wording that I think could be helpful. On Jesse's point on this, the district commissioner may also submit a work. I think it would be helpful to have it more directly say other residents can contact their district commissioner, who may also submit a work request, so that people feel included in that. A lot of people are scared of us commissioners and we change this.
Yeah, I like that. So just start that off with, instead of a district commissioner, any resident may contact their district commissioner.
Yeah. Who can also
and then add who. Yeah.
Yeah, comma, who may also, or.
I think that maybe we could do two sentences there. I would like it if we left a district commissioner may also submit a work request, what we say, through the appropriate channel. And then after that, a resident, and that now capture the statement that says a resident should contact the commissioner. What did y'all come up with for that? If we can do it two sentences.
If this is helpful, I've been adding in red the stuff we've been talking about, which is what I meant to do before the meeting, but I'm happy to email it out after.
Well, if you would just say the sentence again so that we can leave the one that we've worked on, the committee worked on before, and then add a sentence that's giving that more welcoming resident contact your commissioner statement.
If I understood Carol correctly, this would be all one sentence, but does this work for you, Commissioner Wright? It would be any resident may contact their district commissioner, who may also submit a work request through the appropriate channels to the traffic engineer.
So the district commissioner can do it without the resident, is what I'm trying to say. And then we want to give it a welcoming statement for the resident to have that, as Carol was pointing out, we don't want it to be a distance there. So the commissioner can do it by themselves. The commissioner, a resident can initiate it with the commissioner. So if we could do that in two sentences.
Okay.
Are we still okay with a resident contacting the traffic engineer?
Yes, I believe that, and that's why we included the traffic engineer contact information, because we wanted that to be, as you guys were saying, your role in customer service and being able them to talk to you directly was also important. So we were trying to basically expand that contact, make sure that it's comfortable, like you're saying, for the resident to call the commissioner if that's more comfortable to them than calling traffic engineer.
I have it here. Just the second sentence can say other residents, any resident can contact their commissioner to initiate the process, period, and then leave. A district commissioner may also submit a work request to the traffic engineer.
That sounds good. And because also that could mean that if it's in your district, Commissioner Huell, I could have someone that contacted me, then I'm contacting, you know what I mean? It's whoever you're comfortable with. We want to make sure we're encouraging. It's just, does that sounds good to me? Is everybody okay? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay. All right. Where?
I think my fourth and final suggested edit, and then I feel gleeful about moving this forward. And it is section, where's the number here? 5D31C.
Sounds like bingo.
Way in there. 5D1C, where we're talking about at the meeting, the traffic engineer will take attendance. And I wanted to modify C and add a D. So I wanted C to say renters present on behalf of their homeowner. Renters present on behalf of homeowners. So replacing the with written authority from to renters present on behalf of, and then add a D, renters present solely of their own accord. So renters can still show up to this meeting, and we're kind of delineating between the renters who are there with the approval of the homeowner to speak on their behalf, and then the renters who are there speak in their mind, even though they may not have gotten that letter from their landlord.
All right.
Does that sound good to folks?
Let's see some nods on that one. Okay. All right. Cool. Staff, does any of that sound technically unfeasible? Does the wording mesh with what all has been talked about? Is everybody okay with the staff?
I believe it does. I think we can make it work. I think we've opened the door, but haven't knocked the wall down. So I think we'll be able to still be able to do a consistent process and address the needs that we have.
Okay. As well as improving it immensely. Commissioner Parker, I don't want to leave out any areas that you want to bring forward.
Sure. I mean, I had some ideas about how, what maximal inclusion of tenants might look like in a revised draft. But honestly, a lot of Commissioner Hull's suggestions with regards to their engagement with the neighborhood meetings, et cetera, kind of satisfy a lot of those desires. And so other than that, I feel pretty good. Yeah.
All right. So I would like a motion, because one of the reasons I would love to get this in the cycle for the full mayor commission to approve is because I would like during our budget session, because all of this is about if there's money available. So if we get this in front of everybody during budget time, we can maybe get some ideas, Steve, on what would be a nice little package of funding that could go with this project in our new budget cycle. So I'm looking for a motion. Commissioner Huell.
I'll make a motion to approve this policy with the discussed amendments to send to the mayor and commission for adoption. And do I need to list those sections where the amendments were?
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty sure as long as Sarah's still dialed in, I know she's got her little icon up, but shall we have this run by the committee just to look at it one more time?
Sarah, do you want me to list the sections?
I think just for consistency purposes, if you don't mind, I did capture most of them, but I know we were having some language back and forth revisional changes for at least one of the items. So just for consistency, if you don't mind packaging that, I think that would be helpful.
Okay. There you go. Carry on.
And hopefully I've got this right. Okay, so that's section 3E, removing the clause, which typically includes apartments. Section 4CI1, adding the phrase on the homeowner's behalf after neighborhood meeting. Section 5BI, modifying the latter part of that paragraph to say, any resident may contact their district commissioner. A district commissioner may also submit a work request through the appropriate channels to the traffic engineer. And section 5D III1C, modifying that to say renters present on behalf of homeowners, and then adding D, renters present solely of their own accord.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on that list of updates, and I'm ready for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. And we will send this along. Blaine, this puts it into the May vote.
That's right. Thank you.
All right. So now we have cleared the deck ahead of our local civil rights legislation, and the mayor has approved that we split it, as we had discussed when I was here last, maybe February. As far as Blaine, I'm going to let you had that written down better as far as how we were going to split it and discuss it to move forward.
Sure. Thank you. So if you'll remember, y'all had talked about, the ordinance on the one hand, and you've looked at other communities and some things that you'd like to see. And Crystal certainly had some excellent points about, having the ordinance in place is one thing, having people access it, being able to access it, understand it, convey their concerns and complaints was another. And that was the gist of the conversation the chair just alluded to, of splitting that into one on the ordinance. On the other hand, I think it was termed an educational toolkit, and focusing on increasing access. So that was my recollection, Madam Chair. And if appropriate, we could call on Crystal Coburn to elaborate further.
That sounds good. And I just wanted to touch base with the committee. Did you guys recall that as how we were wanting to move ahead, not letting the toolkit hold down, moving the ordinance forward because of the time that we believe, obviously, it needs to be done to improve that? Okay. All right.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I am on, but I don't remember that, but I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Hey, welcome, Ovita. Commissioner Thornton. Okay. Here we go. Thank you, Crystal, for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Would we like to talk about what would be most helpful to discuss? Would you like to break down the educational toolkit thought, or what would be most helpful?
I think that since we were close, Commissioner Parker, I think you and I were the only two currently on the committee that were at that last point where we were really close with the content of the ordinance moving forward. And I think that's why we wanted to split it. So maybe we could talk about parts of the ordinance that your input or the appropriate staff that can help us get to where we have the ordinance to move forward to the rest. And then we would continue on with the educational tool part.
Okay. Well, with regards to the ordinance, Sherry, I think you might be the person to reach out to in that regard.
Sure. I think the history of the ordinance, very briefly, is just that we've drafted it based on your direction, based mostly on the Brookhaven ordinance. It does have some pieces of the Decatur ordinance kind of mixed in, but it's more about conglomeration of them both to try to make the most defensible ordinance that we could. And I think the committee's had it for a while. We just haven't had a chance to talk about it because of the other different issues that have been on the table. So I don't know if there are any concerns about the fundamental language of the ordinance, but I'm happy to discuss those if anyone has any questions. And I'll certainly just refer back to the legal memoranda, the confidential legal memoranda that I've provided here.
Right. And I believe the draft non-discrimination ordinance is October. Mm-hmm. That was our last discussion point with it. And I'll be honest, I have been swamped and haven't gotten to where I've read it recently. So I welcome others' discussion about it. Mariah, did you want to start being on this before, or?
Sure. Yeah. I'm trying to find the part of the draft ordinance that I had a note on. Okay. I think it is under section 6-20-4, exceptions, and number 4, where it says the ordinance does not prohibit an employer from requiring an employee to adhere to a reasonable, equitable, or dress or grooming standards, etc., provided that all employees are permitted to dress in a manner consistent with their gender identity. I was interested in adding racial identity here as well, as there have been a number of cases where particularly African Americans with natural hairstyles like dreadlocks have been discriminated against professionally or in schools, saying that things like dreadlocks are unsanitary or inappropriate for the workplace. It's prompted introduction of the Crown Act at the federal level, barring discrimination based on hairstyle, as well as passage of similar pieces of legislation in 8 states and 18 municipalities, including Clayton County and Stockbridge, Georgia. So I thought that would be an important thing to include here as well.
Do you have that language right there in your ordinance?
Sure. Yeah, I welcome feedback as well, but I think the addition of racial to gender identity would help capture some of that. But if we need to be more specific, I'm happy to entertain other ideas of how we could codify that. So
it would be in a manner consistent with their gender and or racial identity.
Exactly.
And I'd like feedback from staff on if this is the best place to add that in, or just whatever feedback. I think it's a good idea, but I want to make sure it's in the right place. Sherry?
Sure. So I absolutely support the sentiment behind this. I just think it's my duty to point out that although the Crown Act is still pending, there isn't anything that makes discrimination based on dreadlocks or something like that illegal at this time. And the 11th Circuit even ruled in 2017 in this catastrophe management solutions case that, I hate to say it, but refusing to hire someone because of their dreadlocks is legal. So that doesn't mean that we may not want to have a statement or may want to change our own ordinance about how we hire people. But I think we would have trouble including an ordinance that would try to litigate private relationships between other employers when there's that 11th Circuit precedent that's still, as far as I know, good law now. I haven't had a chance to thoroughly research it. I just knew that there was case law on it, so that's why I looked into it. I'm happy to look into it further, see if there's something that's happened since 2017 that might help.
Yeah, I'm not sure how recently those similar pieces of legislation were passed in Stockbridge and Clayton County. Those might be good thing, interesting points of reference for any developments that have emerged around that since 2017. But yeah, I appreciate that feedback, Attorney Hines.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Parker. Commissioner Huel, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I totally support adding that section that Commissioner Parker's talking about. I mean, even if there isn't case law elsewhere to support it yet, I'd like to think that maybe this is part of supporting the movement to get us there, because we need that. I did want to ask Commissioner Parker, do you think it makes sense for us to say consistent with their race, ethnicity, or gender identity, in that I know like legally sometimes ethnicity and race get treated kind of differently, and the way that people.
Yeah, I would welcome that.
Okay. And then I had a few questions I kind of wanted to just discuss here in the meeting. I had a chance to go over them with Attorney Hines, but that wasn't like in a public meeting. And then I also had a couple requests for changes to the language too. So is it all right if I run through at least a couple of them, and then we can?
Yeah, and we're on the draft October document, and I guess just walk us through so we can get to the right place where you're talking.
Oh yeah, and the first thing I wanted to ask, we were sent a modified version in January where Attorney Hines, it was like a Word document. So it's called Non-Discrimination Ordinance 2021-0121 ACC draft, etc. And that has some, I think, were the only language modifications to that, Attorney Hines, changing city to county? Was that all that was changed for that?
I think so, because you and I had talked about changing sheriff or police to sheriff, but then I remembered that our police already serve like our low level, like the alcohol ordinance violations and stuff like that. So it'd probably make more sense to leave it as police. But yes, that's the major change.
Okay.
I think maybe the only changes. I'll pull it up though. I'd forgotten. So thank you for reminding me.
So yeah, I guess for everyone on this body's reference, somewhere buried in your computer's downloads, you might have a minorly modified version that changes the word city to county everywhere. But I think all the sections are the same. So my first one was, I guess this is more a clarifying question that might lead to a language edit, but when we talk about public accommodations, I was curious if that covers schools or childcare facilities. And this is something that I got to talk about with Attorney Hines, but I don't know if you'd like to elaborate upon that a little bit.
Yeah, and I had a chance to talk to some other folks on our team about that as well. And, I think that the answer is it does not, it wouldn't cover the schools because our ordinances don't apply to UGA. They don't apply to the school district, when they're on their property. So I don't think we could do anything about that. As far as childcare centers go that are, private, I think it would apply to them as much as it would apply to any other private entity, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, and also private schools. So if you have a charter school that's not part of the school district and decides that it wants to kick out the trans kids, and I guess what I would like is to make sure that is included in here insofar as it can be. Mm-hmm. So if a kid gets suspended from their private school for using the quote unquote wrong bathroom or something, right? Which is the kind of stuff that we hear about happening around the country. I haven't heard a story here in Athens about that, but right. So without changing any of the language, do you imagine that those schools would be covered by this, or would we need to add something about that?
I definitely need to rethink that particular question, because I think part of it is this is about employment for the most part, or housing. I don't know if the language is broad enough to capture the student-teacher relationship or student-school relationship. But I mean, just off the cuff, they're private schools. They don't have any special sovereign immunity that I can think of. So I would imagine that it would also apply to them. I can look into that some more.
And it seems like it would at least clearly apply to their staff then. So like if
I would think so.
Okay.
Is there a private employer?
Yeah, I guess I'd love some clarity on that because I would love to make sure that we're including that insofar as we can. And then the section around, I'm sorry, I didn't reference we're in definitions, so section 622 definitions. So then, where is it here?
Jesse, which definition was that you were talking about?
That was public accommodations, which is actually not in that section. So where is,
You said section 622. I've only got 620, I think.
6-20-2.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Oh no, that was 6-20-2 10 place of public resort, accommodation, assemblage, or amusement. So that's the public accommodations part.
And having looked at it really quickly, a little bit more, sorry to cut you off, I do think it would apply to private schools because they would meet the definition of a business because they're an entity conducting business with Athens-Clarke County. Well, I forgot about the license and permitting thing. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll just have to research that some more. I apologize.
Well, this is good. We've got, we're getting, some more specifics to the content. We haven't talked about this in a while, so it's good to get everybody's input so that there's time to do the research that's needed, whichever staff member it's appropriate for. I welcome feedback on all fronts for this as well. Jesse, you still got some more?
Yeah, I have a few more. Most of my
section first, and then the topic.
Yeah. Okay. So we're in section 6-20-2, and now we're down to 15, sexual orientation. And this one is fairly minor, but conversations around sexuality and gender are ever evolving, and this kind of reads as if there's only the 3 identities there. And so I wanted to modify that to say actual or perceived sexuality, including but not limited to. So instead of trying to make a comprehensive list of all the different identities people may have around that, pansexual, asexual, etc., we can just use those examples. Does that sound good to people?
It does. And Crystal, is that the most current sort of inclusive description for that category, or is there some feedback that you might have?
Well, there is a factor that we would need to consider, which is part of why I think Attorney Hines' expertise is so relevant and important here. Witness the following: the Supreme Court has identified specific protected classifications, and as of this moment, there's a limited number of protected classifications. So it might actually be a wise approach. I certainly would recommend doing some more research on this to go with the approach of including but not limited to, versus actually listing out various identities or categories that might not constitute a protected classification.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you. Jesse, next.
All right. So a couple of things that I had talked about with Attorney Hines about wanting to add to this list that aren't on it. And I guess just so we're in the meeting talking about it, were immigration status and actual or perceived current housing status. And I was hoping that maybe you could just speak to why you don't think it's a good idea to include those on this list, Attorney Hines. And
Sure.
I welcome discussion from my colleagues if we think that we may or may not want to do that. So.
Right. So it's exactly what Crystal just said about the fact that there are really specific protected classes, and that further we go outside of what are actually recognized as protected classes, the more vulnerable it makes this ordinance. And so it's a question of sort of, do you want to make the perfect be the enemy of the good? And by trying to add in different categories that are meaningful and important and deserve protection, do you end up potentially undermining the entire ordinance?
Right. And that is a big a big component of this, making sure we can stand behind it, especially when we get the educational toolkit to where we can hear what's happening in the community, and so that we can have a meaningful dealing with it meaningfully. So what do some other committee members think on this? And as far as the staying within the protective classes, describing it within, making sure we're accurately capturing that stance.
What was the other, in addition to current or perceived housing status, what was the other class identity that you brought up, Commissioner?
Immigration
status.
Okay.
And do you want me to, I can give like a 30-second reasoning for the two. So immigration status would be like, so that.
I mean, I feel you for sure, but I'd love to hear you elaborate on that.
Yeah, I mean, unnecessary requirement of IDs in places to bar people from being able to enter them, especially with regards to public accommodations, would be one of, I think, many examples where we can think about immigration status being used. But also, national origin and ethnicity kind of provide their own onus for proving. That's a bit different from immigration status, and there are examples of stories where people are basically barred, not necessarily citing where they're from or how they look, but citing the fact that they are, undocumented. So that's the reasoning behind that. And then the reasoning behind actual perceived current housing status is basically that people who are or appear unhoused or homeless or something, whatever word people may use for that, can be treated pretty poorly a lot of the time in ways that are entirely unwarranted and are often, quite discriminatory. And so would we want to, and then also with regards to pursuing housing or employment, that people can have a much harder time finding those things when they don't have an address currently, or they haven't had one for a long time or consistently, or if they appear a certain way.
I get all that. I understand that there are problems, and those are from the people within who are doing the negative things around that categories and many other categories. But we also need to be able to do something about it besides just listing it. So I wonder, are there parts of this in our whereases that are different than the ordinance? You know what I mean? To capture some of our intent and you start off with the golden rule or something like that. I mean, I'm not trying to say that, but I'm just saying, I wonder if we can capture some of the desires of how we want people to be treated or to not be treated. Is that more appropriate in sort of what looks like a resolution at the beginning? Because it's not a protected class within the ordinance. I think that I don't have the answer for that. I just think that might be also a way of looking at what we have in front of us to be able to move forward with what we want to say, the message we want to give, and then what is something that can be in an ordinance that we can do something about. It could be sectioned off differently depending on the topic.
I guess my thought is I'd rather add the protective classes, and if for some reason that does undermine this thing and we have to revisit it and then pass it again in a year with the thing we added removed, so be it. But these are conversations that need to happen, and those are forms of discrimination that need to be dealt with, I guess we'll say. And so providing a protective class that defines things around that way seems to me like this is an important opportunity for that, I guess.
Right. Well, so help me out, and I might be misinterpreting, but if it's not already the established protective class, we're not able to make a new protective class. Am I not hearing that right?
And personally, my opinion is just the opposite. I would rather go with what we. I don't think putting words on the paper, making a statement, is as powerful as having a way to implement it. And I would rather go with what we have, continue to research, and when these open up, that we have some teeth into it, we add it then. I just don't think that putting words out there because we're empathetic or understand is where we would want to use our energy. But when it changes and it opens up and we educate people, see, a lot of this, we still got to educate everybody more and people, and not just say things. So I would rather make the changes when we have teeth that we can actually get a good bite. That's just my personal.
Okay, Carol, I guess we haven't heard from you on this protective class versus areas that are not protective class, and how do we...
Well, one question, I just have a couple of questions. Just to clarify for myself, I haven't dug into this document. I didn't realize how quickly we were going to get through the other one. But the on the list that we have in section 6-20-3, so is my assumption correct? Those are all protected classes: military, veteran military status, familial status. Those are all legally accepted, right? Is that right, Sherry?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes.
Yes. Now, I mean, one of the things I see in this process in terms of enforcement, there's a complaint filed, but there's also then a process for mediation, voluntary mediation. Is that correct? And does that come before there's any legal filing of a problem?
Right. So, I mean, that honestly can be organized however you will like it. I think I just took this straight from Brookhaven's ordinance. We don't, one of the things actually Crystal and I talked about today is that mediation could potentially be expensive. So we may not want to even encourage mediation if we don't have a low income way of doing that. Maybe partnerships with UGA could do that. So it's sort of a roundabout way of saying that, the way this is designed, I think, is really that a complaint comes to our office, we review it and see if it appears that there is an issue. Once there is an issue, then proceedings can happen, mediation can happen. And so there's ways to sort of resolve it before actually going to municipal court. But once it would go to municipal court, then the judge has to make a determination about preemption and then, whether the case goes forward.
Well, I'm just wondering if that is the case and there's that mediation step in there and that we're putting in these other two unprotected classifications of current received housing status and immigration status, there would be no, you'd have the same risk of the financial would be true for anyone, right? So that doesn't really have anything to do with the law. That just has to do with our budget. The people who are in that class, could they not go through that process and then at the next step be advised that there isn't a legal status to proceed with this, but it gives people who are in those categories a way to bring that issue to the attention of the county and gives people their right sort of legal status moving forward. I mean, is there a problem with including those two categories in here up through the mediation step in a sense?
I think there is. You never want to pass things that aren't viable. And maybe an example of how this could be is, what if we passed an ordinance that said walking down the sidewalk is illegal? We know that's not true. We know we would never win in court, but we drag someone to court over it and they sue us, over it. Are there really substantial damages for being dragged into court? Probably not, but it's not I don't think it's a good policy for the government to be using its police powers to try to force someone into a legal encounter, even if it is just mediation, for something they know that there is no valid basis for.
Thank you.
Crystal, did I see you raise your hand for some feedback?
You did. My eyes are also watering. So if you see me wiping my eyes, I promise you I'm not crying because
the pollen thing. Is that pollen thing? Maybe
it's getting to me in a serious kind of a way. So a piece of the conversation that we're having right now is there's a cultural component to societal change, and there's a legal policy component, just roughly, if we were to attempt to break these two prongs down. Shifting culture does not necessarily happen because we have passed an ordinance or implemented a policy or there's a law that's been instituted. So there's a need to think through what's the ultimate change that you as a commission are wanting to achieve, and how do we structure both the legal policy piece and the cultural piece so that we can incentivize the change that you're wanting to see.
Thank you. I think that that's a good delineation there. And who else had their hand up? And thank you for bringing that point up for us to help process which way we're going. We do have several things on the ordinance here that does involve Sherry's research. On that note, I think that maybe we should capture a little bit of what Crystal just said too, as to help us for the next meeting when we have additional input. If we can capture those two categories so we know what is where, and to keep it to what is a legal policy change here. And then the shifting culture topic, I think is all what we want to do, but within an ordinance, I think we have to be aware of where those details go. What other things do we need staff to look into for us to talk about this? This will be our headliner for the next meeting. And then also, so too, we do start off with, so the ordinance starts off with the whereases, and I didn't mean to belittle it like it was a resolution, but it starts off with the whereases and then gets into the actual chapter 620. Do we want to, does everybody have anything else to give staff? And if staff has more to, from our discussions that they want to share with us to help us move this forward, especially since we've divided the question, so to speak, from the educational toolkit as well in the ordinance, please be prepared for that for next meeting. Commissioner Huell.
Thanks, Commissioner Wright. So one other thing I wanted to look into in the definitions was under familial status, if family structure or relationship status is something that could be added into that. And I'm thinking of Somerville, Massachusetts, legalized different family structures, polyamorous and otherwise, when they rewrote a law last year. So along those lines, that's something I'd like us to pursue. And then,
excuse me again, what section are we under here?
This is the same 6-20-2.
Under definitions.
Okay. Definitions would be, so that'd be the family. And then, since I know we're running up on time, the other three things in this policy I was hoping we could look into are section 6-20-5 under enforcement, where it says each side shall be entitled to representation by counsel of their choice at their own expense. My understanding was that we were actually providing people recourse through the county to pursue certain claims in some cases. Is that, I'm seeing a head shake there. So,
well, sorry, I didn't know exactly where you were going to go. So the county can certainly bring a charge like a regular prosecutor, and so we could pursue that. But if there's going to be like mediation or some sort of litigation between the two parties directly, or if the complainant just wants to have an attorney, this is just clarifying that the county does not pay for anybody's attorney because we can, it would be a gratuitous class violation. There's no right to an appointed attorney in most civil cases other than defects.
Okay. And then section 2, where it says this ordinance shall take effect 30 days after passage. Guess I'm just wondering why not have it take effect the day that we pass it. And section 3, the county manager is authorized to develop such policies and procedures as are necessary to give effect to this ordinance. I was going to suggest the county manager, in collaboration with the Office of Inclusion, is authorized to develop such policies, assuming that our Office of Inclusion officer thinks that makes sense, and the county manager.
Well, Blaine, should I defer to you on that one or dive in?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't have, much of substance to say there other than to say the inclusion office consistently works closely with our manager's office in addition to multiple departments throughout ACC Gov. So we would be more than happy if you would like to add that language.
Especially since it's a new department and entity that most municipalities don't have. I think it would be a good highlight within there. But since she is within the county manager's department, I mean, it's inclusive, but it doesn't hurt to amplify your presence and your department's presence. Jesse, can we go back to the calendar days before? Oh no, I missed the part. I think that Manager Williams, can you speak to how long it takes once we vote, or the attorney, when we vote on an ordinance, how long it takes to get in the Muni Code and just that whole part of it becoming solidified? Or can you explain that and why the 30 days?
Sure. I think that the 30 days was just for time to notify the community that this was actually going into place. I will say that there is no fixed date for the clerk getting amended ordinances or new ordinances into Muni Code. I think she does it sort of in a batch type process that she gets so much at a certain time. So it could vary. But I believe the intent was probably just for dissemination before enforcement began.
But I'll say, and I told Commissioner Holthus that Judd and I don't see any problem with it, going into effect immediately if you would like to, other than just, as you said, there's less of a time period to alert the community.
Right. Well, what does the committee think on that? When we see this policy next with the other input, do we want to go ahead and say, within 7 days of it being voted on, or something, condense it, but yet be feasible for us to be ready to respond? Commissioner Hewell, what's everybody think?
Oh, I'm just asking, what's the difference in practicality in terms of 2 dates? Immediate, Jesse. One versus the end. Would this limit how a person could use this? Is that the issue here?
I guess it started as just a question, why 30 days? And then, I guess what occurred to me was that usually there's a lot more coverage of what's happening when we're discussing it and vote on it. And so having it take effect immediately might help elevate the understanding in the community that this is passing. But, if the consensus here is that it's actually better to give more time to then get the word out in other ways as well, that makes sense to me as well. I'm not attached to it either way, but it seemed to me when I had initially made that suggestion that it might actually help in terms of getting the word out, to have it be like, and now this is a thing.
Yeah. Well,
similar to like when the stroke of the governor's pen happens, it is a law, even though it obviously takes time for the machinations that support it to get put in place. When the stroke of the mayor's pen hits this, then it's on the books.
Well, let's not align this to something with the governor's pen. But I do like the enthusiasm of it, being now, and I understand that and appreciate the enthusiasm of this coming forward. But if we want to be prepared, and that's where I got kind of hung up on the educational toolkit and making that the best it can be when this rolls out. But I've learned to separate them so that we can get the enthusiasm of this being out for the full mayor and commission, and then making sure the toolkit is in place soon after, or as soon as practical with that. So we, as a committee, okay with leaving it with 30 days there as far as the next time we see this? Mariah's shaking yes. Carol, Ovita, I can't see you shaking your head. What are you thinking? She might be on mute.
Well, I'm going to say something. Carol's here.
Go ahead.
I'm saying, in terms of this ordinance does seem very fundamental to me about basic human rights and protection. And for that reason, and it's been a long term coming. So I wouldn't be against putting this into effect immediately to draw attention to it. I would like to know if there would be any just logistical repercussions or that I'm not aware of for that. This is, difference than putting into effect the lead code, which really has to do with putting buildings. I mean, this just is a different magnitude here. So just in terms of my learning curve, is there an issue with it? Does it have to be in the Muni code before it can be applied? Does it, are there other things I'm not thinking about where getting this in effect immediately would be a problem?
Does any staff member or a manager want to try to give a little summary on the process?
No, I agree with Attorney Hines. I don't think there's any issue with it. I think it was just a notice issue. And my understanding is, the moment that it's approved, unless directed otherwise, it goes into effect. And so we would enforce it accordingly. Of course, we'd have to train, I'm not saying here like this would be arduous training or anything, but we'd have to get the appropriate staff to understand the nuances and everything. So, but no, I don't think any sticking issue on the date.
And then the other part of that being, so the Muni code. So like when we were searching, and I think that Sherry, Attorney Hines had looked for other documentation in some other place. Well, if somebody heard about this and wanted to see our ordinance, it's not going to be in the Muni code to be found. So it would be, one of those things I think that we would typically vote on. It would the type thing pass and say, hey, can we put this up on the web in its entirety or something like that, so that it's findable. I think that that's one way around it there, to help us celebrate and promote what we're doing, type thing. Anything else for staff to work on? I think that we should stick with this topic, don't you, instead of adding a new one for the next meeting? Is everybody good with that?
We're moving the neighborhood traffic management program out, and so we'll have this. Do we feel like this will take up an entire discussion next time, or do we want to add a second one, since we've tended to have two?
Well, I have not been able to predict the length of meeting or how many topics can be covered. I have lost that in the last couple of years.
I mean, I'm fine with having more dedicated time to this so that we can be thorough. Just, I don't know.
Yeah, and then if we roll into talking about the educational toolkit, I think that would be our next roll, because we've already started that. And I guess I'm just trying to keep staff from having to be dialed into this meeting on a new topic. I know you guys are all dying to tackle the leaf blowers, but I would rather move on to our special events, which is on the docket next. But I don't want staff to get ready for that yet. Right, Commissioner Parker, don't you think we can keep talking about this for the next?
Good. I like the idea of rolling the educational toolkit into our discussion if we have more time at the end of next meeting.
Yeah. Or within, we'll make it work within. Yeah. And then,
Commissioner, do we have any documents on that educational thing? Anything where I could be, kind of caught up with or have something to work with for next time?
I think it was included in our email materials, and as an attachment with under the name "Making Discrimination." What's this say? Making discrimination complaint processes more accessible.
Okay. Yeah.
And we can start with what we currently have I think that Crystal had shared sort of how laborious and online, offline, printout, turn in that we have right now for our current one about dress codes and private parties downtown. And we can use that current topic as if we need as a example of to improving access of what's there and how to report it. We've only had one alcohol license bar who was had to close for a weekend because of what was found to be legit. And I think we all know that there's way more out there that's being turned in and followed up on like that. So if we can improve that, I think that'll happen with this as well. Anything else on this topic I'm sorry, Commissioner Huell.
Sorry, it just wasn't clear to me. There were two things. So we kind of breezed past the familial status thing, and I saw, I think, a nod from someone, but like, I just want to make sure that's on the table for us to discuss in the next meeting, I guess. And then it wasn't clear to me if we had actually arrived at a consensus on whether to just have this take effect immediately or sit there for 7 or 30 days before it does. Sorry if I kind of missed that, but it seemed like we kind of had different thoughts happening there.
Yeah, I think you had different thoughts as well. But so if the 30 days gives us more time to be able to handle what could come in is one effect. And I had suggested that we could ask for the ordinance once passed to be online to help people find it, since it won't be in Unicode yet. But I don't think we've come up with a conclusion on that at this point. And then the familiar one, I kind of couldn't track down where you were talking in the document. The one I found was more related to 18 years and older. But
does the ordinance? My understanding would be that the ordinance only covers transgressions, or whatever you want to call it, violations that take place while it is in effect. So I don't know if that's influencing our thoughts around like, it will pass it and suddenly we'll get a bunch of them, as if there is a backlog of folks that have not been able to address their grievances that will suddenly jump on it. But I don't know if it works like that. No, Sherry's shaking her head no. I don't know either. And so I see both sides of like having the 30 days to like get the infrastructure in place to start fielding the complaints, as well as taking effect immediately. And if like that week someone, has a problem with their employer, they're able to come, at least know that this is available to them, even if we don't necessarily have the mechanisms on the books. Like I guess in a sense, they are now covered by the ordinance because it takes effect immediately, as opposed to it taking effect 30 days later. If something happened a week after we formally pass it, would their complaint then fall under the policy? That was a question. It started out as a statement, turned into a question.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely right in that until this goes into effect, no alleged discrimination will be actionable. So if you pass it on June 1, June later that day on June 1 or June 2 would be the first eligible.
I think for that reason, making it effective immediately upon passage is important, so that like if people are hearing about it and they have something happen to them within that month window, they can take advantage of the protections rather than not understanding that it hasn't taken effect yet, even though it's passed. And I think lingering might create more confusion than we create access.
Carol's got a thumbs up. Ovita, any feedback? Okay. So does staff have more than plenty to do for the next meeting? And the feedback has been clear, or did you guys need any more committee clarity on our feedback? I mean, we do. Go ahead.
One question about the whereases, to borrow your word, up at the top. Are you wanting to utilize that section to frame the change that the commission is hoping to see from the implementation of the ordinance? Am I understanding that correctly?
I think it's a good place for that. And Crystal, have you read over it? And when you read it, do you see places it could be improved?
Attorney Hines and I, forgive me if I've been calling people by your first name, it's habit. Attorney Hines and myself, and also Manager Williams and myself, have had a number of conversations about this. Some of those pieces were already touched on today, or were raised. So, for example, with navigating costs, for example, for going through mediation, that could become potentially a barrier to access. But simply thinking about this conversation right now, There are small things like changing the word citizens to residents. That's very small. Something like again, I should not be doing this off the top of my head, but listening to you frame things out, perhaps, whereas the mayor and commission of the Unified Government of Athens-Clarke County are committed to creating an Athens-Clarke County where every single resident belongs, regardless of identity, language such as that helps to drive home what it is you're wanting to accomplish with the ordinance could potentially help to frame things out a bit.
Yes, welcome all that. Other committee members, do you want to see what they're thinking about and improvements like that? And definitely the resident over citizen is definitely needs to be, we need to have a global switch out on that on all of our documents.
I agree. I'm not doing thumbs up, so I'm just chiming in. So yes, I agree.
Okay, so how about the next version of this does have your 2 cents in there and your improvements for capturing that and updating that front part. I think that's a good idea. All right.
I'm happy to connect with Attorney Hines as always.
Yeah. You guys, now I know why you guys are on first name stuff is because y'all hang out so much. Okay. So, all right. So we're at the end of our meeting. Carol.
I just want to, if we can get some clarification, I can get some more maybe from Sherry, from the attorney's office on the reasoning, just something I have to understand more why we can't push it with the current and perceived housing status and immigration status. So something to mull over a little bit more. I would appreciate that because I like the idea of pushing that and what the risks are if we put that language in. I just want to understand that.
Right. So we might need just sort of another little pep talk as far as the specific protected classes with that in mind. And if some of this stuff that wants to be addressed, but are not specific protected classes, if that could be included in the whereases part of it, maybe. But I'm comfortable with seeing what staff brings forward. Our next meeting I have as May 6th. Sarah, is that what you have as well? And
yes,
so, so we'll be just this topic and the toolkit. And does that sound good for everybody? Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yes, ma'am. Sounds good to me.
All right. Bye.
With a motion to adjourn?
Yes. Motion to adjourn. Somebody? Don't leave yet.
So I make the motion.
Oh, Vita makes a motion. And second, Carol. And then all in favor of adjourning, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.